There are 100 people on death row in the state of Pennsylvania. This is part 2 of the series. George Banks, 38 years on death row. At his Pennsylvania home on the evening of September 24, 1982, Banks took prescription medications and drank a lot of straight gin. On September 25, 1982, the following morning, he killed 8 people in his home with an AR-15 semi-automatic weapon. Among them were 3 women in their 20s who were his girlfriends and the mothers of his children, as well as 5 children, 4 of whom were his own. After changing into military clothes and going outdoors, Banks noticed Jimmy Olsen, 22 years old, and Ray Hall, 24 years old, leave a home across the street. He apparently yelled that they would not tell anyone about this before shooting the 2 of them. He struck both individuals, leaving Hall dead. Olsen fortunately lived. Banks sped off. He proceeded to the Heather Highlands mobile home park, where he was attempting to obtain custody of his son, who resided with his ex-girlfriend Sharon Mazzillo. Banks shot Mazzillo after breaking through the door. Then he shot and murdered his son, who was asleep. Banks murdered both Sharon's mother, who was attempting to contact the police, and her nephew, who was 7 years old, who was there in the house. Banks never saw the brother of Sharon, who was hiding in the closet. Being the sole survivor, he informed the authorities that Banks was the shooter. Police linked the shooting of Olsen and Hall, which they had found at Schoolhouse Lane, to the victims they had studied at the mobile home park. Next, they discovered Banks's victims inside his home. After Banks abandoned his car and stole another, police started looking for him. Banks left the stolen car behind, pulled over in a remote patch of grass, and went to sleep. Banks went to his mother's home in Wilkes-Barre once he woke up. He allegedly told her about his crimes. She took him to Banks's buddy Jacob Witt's house, where he sent her on her way and got ready for a police standoff. His mother was brought to the police base so that Banks could speak with her. To convince the murderer to turn himself in, they tried a number of strategies, such as fabricating a story that was broadcast on the radio, claiming that the children were still alive and in need of blood to survive. That didn't work. After a 4-hour confrontation, it was Banks's former co-worker Robert Brunson that was able to persuade him to turn himself in. Robert Wharton, 37 years on death row. After breaking into a house, Robert Wharton and Eric Mason drowned a woman in the bathtub and strangled the man to death. Eric Mason and Robert Wharton were both taken into custody. Wharton received a death sentence and Mason received a life term. When the 2 men broke into Lisa Hart's family's East Mount Airy house in January of 1984, she was just 7 months old. Bradley Hart, 25 years old, was strangled, and her mother Fern, who was 30 years old, was drowned in an upstairs bathtub. The young girl was abandoned in the house, but she made it out alive. Stephen Duffy, 37 years on death row. On February 17, 1984, in the afternoon, Kathy Kernchuk's body was discovered in the woman's bathroom of Genetti's Manor, a restaurant in Dixon City, Pennsylvania. At the age of 19, the victim worked as a server at the restaurant. She was discovered in a pool of blood slumped in the bathroom stall's corner. She had suffered about 30 stab wounds. That day, a yellow Chrysler LeBaron was spotted parked behind the restaurant, according to a later police inquiry. All staff members were routinely questioned, and it was discovered that Stephen Duffy, who was working at Genetti's Manor at the time, had come by the business that day to drop off a W-4 tax form. He was found to be the driver of the yellow Chrysler LeBaron, and the vehicle parked behind the restaurant was positively confirmed as his. Ralph Stokes, 36 years on death row. The fact that Ralph Stokes and Donald Jackson took part in the March 12, 1982 robbery of Smokin' Joe's Corner led to their convictions. Stokes had worked at Smoking Joe's restaurant and bar before. Jackson stated in court that he and Stokes had prepared for the robbery by dressing in blue jumpsuits, donning ski masks, and arming themselves with guns. Stokes had a .38 caliber revolver, while Jackson carried an automatic handgun. With their weapons out, the 2 men went through the unlocked rear kitchen door inside the restaurant. They went up against Renard Mills and Pierre Blasingame, 2 workers in the kitchen. Around the same moment, Eugene Jefferson, a third employee, came into the kitchen from another area of the structure. After locking the three workers inside the walk-in refrigerator, Ralph Stokes entered the restaurant's office and spoke with Mary Figueroa, the manager and the spouse of one of Smokin' Joe's proprietors. Jackson entered the office, where Mrs. Figueroa and Ralph Stokes were arguing about who had the right to unlock the safe. Jackson then saw that Stokes' ski mask had been pulled up over his face. When Jackson ordered him to cover his face, he retorted that Mrs. Figueroa had already identified him. Along with the other three employees, Mrs. Figueroa was put in the walk-in refrigerator after she unlocked the safe. The others were informed by Mrs. Figueroa that she recognized Trent. Then she tried to be a soothing force for everyone else in the fridge. After putting everyone inside the refrigerator, Jackson and Stokes continued their restaurant looting. A mailman named Peter Santangelo occurred to stop by during these proceedings. Just enough to let the mail through, Jackson slightly opened the kitchen door before shutting it. Fearing he would be recognized, Stokes pursued the mailman, dragging him into the restaurant and telling him to lie on the kitchen floor at the touch of a revolver. Stokes pressed his ear to the refrigerator door to try and listen in on what the people inside were saying. Jackson was subsequently informed by Ralph Stokes that he had been recognized and would need to off the witnesses. At that point, Stokes opened the refrigerator and discharged 3 rounds, killing Mary Figueroa and Eugene Jefferson. When Peter Santangelo saw this happening, he bolted from the kitchen. Mr. Santangelo became the third victim, receiving 3 gunshots when he was besieged at the locked front door. The 2 men then fled the scene. Henry Daniels, 34 years on death row. Daniels took part in a plan on September 1, 1988, to abduct 16-year-old Alexander Porter and hold him for ransom. In order to get Porter to come to a meeting, Henry Daniels and 3 other people staged a fictitious drug transaction. They bound and gagged Porter, took his keys, and shoved him into the trunk of his car. To keep Porter from realizing his involvement, one of the conspirators, a friend of his, permitted himself to be bound in front of Porter. After Porter was placed in the trunk, he was released and sent home, leading Porter to believe that his friend had been murdered. Porter's car was driven by the remaining conspirators to one of the people's garages, where they parked it with Porter inside. They drove to Porter's mother's house in a different vehicle, broke into the house with Porter's key. Then, they broke into his father's house, whom they thought to be extremely wealthy. When they got back, Porter was no longer wearing his handcuffs. One of the people made Porter reveal his mother's and father's phone numbers and demanded to know how much Porter was worth to his father before restraining him once more. Porter was informed that his companion had been slain and that he would also be killed if he did not cooperate. Porter gave them his dad's beeper number and his mother's phone number. At that point, Porter's captors made the decision to kill him instead of carrying out their extortion plot. Henry Daniels and one of his accomplices set out to dispose of the victim under cover of darkness. Porter was thrown face down on the side of the road. One of the conspirators shot Porter 4 times in the back of the neck with an automatic weapon, not knowing if he had died from strangling or from gagging. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.